South Africa has called for an immediate end to the violence and for restraint. Let's unpack this with Zane Dangor, the Department of International Relations and Cooperation's Director General. Zane, I appreciate your time this afternoon. How's the Department of International Relations and Cooperation monitoring and responding to the current situation in Israel and Gaza?
Good afternoon, Hugo. So we've got a team on the ground. We've got a head of mission in Ramallah, and we've also got a charge in Tel Aviv. And they've been giving us updates from on the ground as to what the situation is. As you indicated in your introductory remarks, there's been quite a few calls for de-escalation and for an immediate ceasefire and for peace. We joined those calls. We call for a move towards a discussion towards a just and lasting peace. The fact that there is an occupation, and it is an unlawful occupation, and this is not an accusation, this is a statement of fact, has been borne out by, for example, the International Court of Justice. The mere fact that you have an occupation means that there is still indeed, after 70 years, an armed conflict. This armed conflict has moved in ebbs and flows from escalation of violence to interregnums of comparative peace while talks would be going on. But the fact is that this talks there's not been a credible peace, a Middle East peace talks over the last decade or so. And the last year has been incredibly bad. I think that one would look at, since the new government has come in, the new coalition government, which has been described as the most right-wing in history, that the kinds of, the breaches of international law by the Israeli government has escalated to the extent that many of us were not surprised by the events of yesterday. It's regrettable. We think that nobody benefits from an escalation of violence and conflict. But we did see this coming, given the sense, the number of killings of civilians over the last 12 months or so. So our assessment is that the international community must come together and call for an immediate ceasefire, but also lay the basis for a just and lasting peace. Now, just and lasting peace means that the issues such as the end of the occupation needs to take place, the end of settlements needs to be agreed upon, the respect for international law around the use of force by an occupying power, the responsibility of an occupying power in terms of the civilians over whom they will control. All of that needs to be part of the negotiations and the discussions. So we will be reaching out we've been engaging with the Palestinian Authority, not with anybody else at this stage, but we are open to engaging with any of the players so that we can actually assist in whatever way we can towards a just and lasting peace and the negotiations that need to precede that.
Now, Zane, you talk about the international community needing to come together, but is the international community speaking with one voice?
Unfortunately not. And I think this is one of the issues that we are raising in the international arena is that when it comes to the situation in Palestine, international law becomes secondary. Politics becomes almost prescient. So you'll find that there is, developing countries who feel that you need to have consistency in the application of international law, asking for Israel to be held more accountable. And through that level of accountability, you have movement towards a just and lasting peace. Unfortunately, you find that the actions of Israel, especially over the last decade, but particularly this year, has actually in many ways been okayed by many of the big players in the international community. There may have been criticisms after the assault in Jenin, but generally there has been no pressure put on the Israeli government to move towards a genuine peace talk that will give rise to a just and lasting peace. So the international community is not speaking with one voice. And I think what we must be doing as South Africa and others is to get the UN to be at the center of this. That the UN must, beyond just making statements calling for Israel to obey international law, lay the basis for all the parties to come around the table and negotiate an end to the occupation. An end to the occupation will actually give rise to peace. Without ending the occupation, you'll have this conflict moving in much the same way as it has over the last 70 years, with more and more Palestinian land being taken over, lots of pressure being put on the Palestinian to act peacefully, but no expectations of similar peaceful action by the security forces of Israel. South Africa's position is always that the use of force, war is never an option. War is never wise. But we also believe that once the use of force is engaged in by any of these forces, whether it's the colonial, the occupying forces, or even those fighting what can be called wars of resistance, that the Geneva Conventions must be respected. All of them, whether it's the armed groups on the one side or the security forces on the other side, must ensure that civilians and non-combatants are not attacked.
Now, speaking as an international relations expert, just how powerful or influential is the United Nations or any other similar body for that matter? Because there are multiple conflicts happening across the world as we speak that have been happening for periods, for the last couple of years. The coups on the African continent, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, just to name a few. And you're calling to the United Nations to step in and in some way try and put an end to this. Do they have the capability or the willpower to do so?
Let's say that the UN has the potential to end this, and that's the entire reason for its existence following the Second World War, was to end the kinds of horrors that we experienced with the Second World War. So you've got the Article Chapter 7 provisions where the UN is at the center of ensuring peace and security. But of course the UN is also influenced by different geopolitical considerations, and it has not been able to play the role that we want it to play. Nonetheless, it is the central institution for global governance that can bring about peace. And we need the UN to be at the center of this. We need to work at the flaws. We need to work at restructuring it so that it becomes more representative of the global community, that the Security Council, for example, is more effective in doing the work that it needs to do in terms of protecting peace and security across the globe. But in the absence of another institution of global governance that basically has the kind of membership that the UN has, we need to make sure that the UN plays its role. You have other formations that in this particular conflict, the US and others have been playing significant roles, but in essence, when it is one or two countries calling the belligerents around the table, politics and narrow national or global interests supersede the need to actually have a just and lasting peace. I think the events of the last 2 days has just shown how unsustainable this kind of approach is, and that we need to put the UN back at the center of ensuring that they bring the players around the table and get to a just and lasting peace, because it's only the UN that can also have the abilities to hold all the parties accountable to what has been agreed. So I hear what you're saying about the weaknesses within the UN system at the moment, but it's the only institution that we have that is geared up specifically to do this.
Now, given your background in social development, do you see any potential avenues for humanitarian assistance, for support to the affected populations in the conflict zone?
I think this is the first issue that we must be addressing. What we must do is ensure that when we and others like Saudi Arabia and many others, including Daniel Levy, who used to be an Israeli negotiator, are calling for de-escalation, that also means that we shouldn't be giving a green light to Israel because of these attacks to go into Gaza in a manner that will cause more humanitarian disasters, more civilian deaths. What we should be doing is asking them for restraint, to get around the negotiation table. And the first part of that is to ensure that humanitarian corridors are opened, particularly in Gaza. Gaza has been described as perhaps the world's largest open-air prison. The embargo against Gaza is significant. Medicine, access to life-saving goods and services is all controlled by the Israeli government. So what we need to do, together with others in the international community, is put in place the measures to ensure humanitarian corridors are opened immediately as part of a peace engagement. So the cessation of hostilities is important. We should be discouraging major powers from giving a green light to Israel to use force at this stage as a response to the attacks by the armed groups from Palestine.
Zane, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for sharing your insights this afternoon.